Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. This week, we got Tom Brady, Deshaun Watson, and March Madness is upon us. Dan, how's it going, my friend?
It's going well, Dan. You know, it just seems like every week we have stories that intersect, sports law stories that intersect with my world, which is sports betting and gambling. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today with the, really surprising news out of Las Vegas involving Tom Brady futures bets and the potential use of insider information. But almost everything that we talk about has some connectivity to the gambling landscape. So we're going to lead off with that. And other than that, everything's going well by me. And just another week with a great guest coming up.
Yes, we have Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports. It's funny, maybe people don't realize this. Dan and I look at everything you guys tag us in. One of our listeners, I won't shout him out, but tagged us. Dan Wetzel was writing about Christian Dawkins, the college hoops corruption scandal case. And someone tagged us and they said, at Wallach Legal, at Sports Us, at Conduct Detrimental, you should have Dan Wetzel on the podcast. Wetzel saw it, we saw it, and we made it happen. So you guys, you always kind of direct us towards our guests. So we certainly appreciate that.
Crowdsourcing
help. He was a great
guest.
Yeah. So, Dan, you mentioned your world of sports gambling. I think it's now all of our world because sports betting is now becoming more and more legal across the country. 30 states, we're in the home stretch, of our entire country having some form of sports betting. But we'll certainly get there. Okay, so the big news in the NFL, Dan, let's start with Tom Brady. Tom Brady is back. We recorded a podcast over the weekend about Deshaun Watson, and we said one of the teams he might go to is Tampa Bay because they don't have a quarterback. So in between us recording the podcast and the podcast coming out, Tampa Bay all of a sudden has their quarterback, and that's Tom Brady. The futures odds, if you could catch it correctly, and I've been telling my closer friends about this, but I'm happy to share it with our podcast listeners. FanDuel, DraftKings, all of our big sites, they have a fundamental flaw at a certain level that the tweets coming out from Adam Schefter or Jeff Passan or Woj, right? They see them at the same time we do. Those are ESPN insiders. They're not DraftKings and FanDuel insiders. So what happened was Brady announced he was coming back, and there was maybe a 90-second window that the futures odds had not moved. So Brady, basically made the Tampa Bay Bucks odds shift from 22-1 to win the Super Bowl to plus 750. So that's a massive, massive jump. And if you were following Twitter very closely in those 90 seconds, you got a huge jump on the futures market. So Dan, what are your thoughts on Brady coming back, the impact on the futures? And then I have another Brady question after, but let me get your first thoughts.
Well, yeah, I think this really does expose the problem with the sports books. They weren't reading the same information we were. Obviously, all these ESPN insiders were reporting, and certainly anyone who was following the Tom Brady unretirement saga over the last couple of weeks knew full well that there was a risk and a little bit more of a certainty that this decision was not a final etched in stone decision by Tom Brady. And I think the sports books in Las Vegas should have set their prices to reflect that risk and uncertainty. And apparently they didn't. And a couple of sharp, gamblers took advantage of that, either because they had inside information that Brady was coming back, or they suspected that there was a very strong likelihood that that would happen. And they took advantage of some bad pricing.
But I think the books fell asleep because I was listening to podcasts last week that were talking about Brady potentially coming back and maybe even demanding a trade to the San Francisco 49ers. So that was in the vortex, right? It was certainly possible.
Of course, it was in the public domain.
Yeah, it was.
Right? Maybe not coming back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I don't think the story goes anywhere. I think it's a disgruntled sportsbook, the Westgate Sportsbook, their vice president, Jay Cornegay, who's a very well-known bookmaker in Las Vegas. He was, complaining to a Las Vegas-based sports gambling writer, Todd Dewey, that, he thinks that these sharp gamblers who bet a lot of money on a Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl win were taking advantage of actual inside information, and he wants the NFL to investigate, and that's not going to happen.
No, it's sometimes, and it happens. It happens that the books are just, this is the world of, the COVID sports season that we're in. Uh-huh. Someone's out with COVID. Schefter tweets it, Passan tweets it, and the line, it's a human being. So you as a bettor, as a recreational bettor, now in New York, we can be part of them, are now erasing the books to those bets. So, it's a certain situation. Dan, the other part of the Brady saga that I think we should hit, that friend.
They may try to avoid the bet, by the way.
No, they can't. They shouldn't. It's not. It's public. And I followed it. Right? Brady had the tweet I saw on Sunday night. Brady's tweet came out at 7:13 p.m. The line did not change at I'm not going to call anybody out, but a lot of these main books for like 90 to 120 seconds. And if you could get a bet in that quickly, you could cash out right after that. So
When was the bet made? When was the bet made? I thought it was made a few days prior. Was it
well,
made in that
so we're talking
window?
about two different things. We're talking about someone that have inside information that made a bet on a Friday or a Saturday. And then we're also talking about a window that I don't think anyone is saying is, impermissible, that from the tweet coming out, right, when it is certainly public knowledge, to the time the line moves, those recreational bettors, those Twitter push notifications people, they will jump in, and the books are a little bit slow to react. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that's, if you're a recreational bettor and you don't have inside information, that's your best bet right there. I mean, you just got to pay attention to the news. Dan, here's the other part of the story. The other one that kind of fell asleep at the wheel, right? We can say books kind of did to some extent. Some of this is certainly unavoidable, right? You and I we'll talk about the Deshaun Watson stuff. That's another thing that books have to be very mindful of. Now, Dan, there was an individual who on Sunday night, when that tweet came out from Tom Brady at 7:13, probably lost his lunch, maybe lost his dinner, right? It's an individual that paid $518,000 for the final touchdown pass of Tom Brady's career at auction. So, friend of the show, Darren Ravel, put an article out on it. And, I guess I'll give people the brief history. I think it's so fascinating. I'll leave it to you as to, where we go legally. But an auction, there was a ball that was put up for consignment in December. Brady's final ball. I don't think anybody knew that Brady was necessarily retiring in December. The ball is put up for this consignment company, and the auction finally goes off on, I think it was March 12th or March 13th, either Saturday or Sunday. The description described the ball being the final touchdown pass of Brady's career. At the time the ball was put up for auction, and at the time the bidding closed for $518,000, Brady had not announced that he was coming back. So you have now, Dan, someone that spent $500,000 on a ball that is probably now not worth 50,000, right? I don't know how much. It certainly lost a lot of its value overnight. My understanding, and this is a little bit from Darren, the money had not yet been paid by this buyer, that it had to be wired within a certain amount of time. It had not yet been paid. So we're looking at a situation. I feel like a lawsuit's coming here, Dan. What are your thoughts on this buyer's remorse situation with Brady's ball?
I think this all turns on state contract law and what the terms were, within the auction house. But you're dealing with a very rarefied sector of commercial transactions, and these auction houses have customer relationships that have endured for a long time. Nobody in their right mind believes this football from something other than Tom Brady's last game would be worth $500,000. I mean, is it a mutual mistake of fact? Is it legally? Does it provide justification for rescinding this contractual relationship? But I think, as the article in which you were quoted and rightfully pointed out, I think this is sort of a gentleman's, or this is sort of an understanding among people within that business or within that industry that they're not going to enforce that obligation. And if the auction house has to pay the seller the difference to maintain its good standing with the purchaser and within the industry, I think it would be a black eye for the auction house to allow somebody to profit from what was an obvious, palpable mistake. And, I just think, as a matter of contract law, the outcome is one thing, but as a matter of customer relations and industry goodwill, the outcome is going to point in a different direction. So I think the auction house either eats the difference in value, or, both sides walk away from it. I don't think this will ultimately be enforced against the buyer who entered into this transaction in good faith, believing that this was the last touchdown pass that Tom Brady threw. It maybe would hold up in court, but in that sector of the industry, I don't think they're going to enforce it.
So there's one player in this case that we haven't spoke about, and I don't know who it is, but somebody gave the ball to this auction house to sell on consignment. So that individual, right, is certainly going to feel pretty aggrieved. If the sale is canceled for whatever reason, that individual is probably one that might turn around and sue the auction house and say, hey, this should have gone up. What nefarious happened? There was no inside information with Tom Brady and whatnot. And I think, his argument, or their argument, I don't know who it was, but would probably say, and as has been now reported out there, that this individual got the ball for only $518,000 because people were afraid to bid, because there were rumors that Brady was coming back. So I think the auction house has to be very careful how they handle this 500,000 buyer, right? This is potentially their customer base. They have to be careful, but I don't really treat this as, certainly in one sense it's unprecedented, Dan, but in the similar sense, right? It's a buyer not paying for something that they bought at auction. So that happens all the time.
Yeah, but the terms and conditions are going to, kind of create the rules of the road here. And these auction houses are not neophytes when it comes to protecting themselves with all these contingencies that could arise. I mean, this isn't the first time something like this may have happened in a bidding situation. So the bidding house or the auction house is going to create enough wiggle room and discretion for them to make judgment calls like this, be able to void deals, just like sports books do that. If there's a palpable error, when there was a pricing error in a FanDuel wager, I think it was at the beginning of the last NFL season or 2 NFL seasons ago, 2019, there was a pricing error that allowed, you remember with, I think it was one of the Atlanta Falcons games, and FanDuel had within its terms and conditions the ability to void the bet. Unfortunately, New Jersey's gambling regulator, the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, wouldn't allow them to do it and said that it was you should probably reconsider. This could affect your licensure within the state of New Jersey. So in the gambling industry, the sports books cannot necessarily act, strictly according to the terms of service, but in the non-gambling world of auction houses, the terms and conditions likely provide an out for the auction house in this kind of a situation where there's a mistake.
We'll see what comes of it. I imagine that's probably the last of the story, but, we'll see. Dan, let's hit Watson quick, and then I want to make sure we get to our guest, Dan Wetzel. I don't want to bury our college troops mega guest. Deshaun Watson, a story that we've been following very closely. Obviously, we had Matt Timpanic on the last podcast to break down how the grand jury came out. Dan, as of today, the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes is down to at least 4, looks like 4 teams. From what we're reading, Deshaun Watson was only allowed to speak with the teams that a trade had already been agreed to in principle. So there was a report out there that the Jets offered 3 first-round picks and Zach Wilson, and the Texans either said no, or Watson said, "When I'm not waiving my no trade clause," but one of the two. So a lot of teams you're not going to hear about that tried to get in the sweepstakes. The last 4 teams that Watson has met with that have made trade offers that are at least in consideration: the New Orleans Saints, the Carolina Panthers, the Cleveland Browns, and the Atlanta Falcons. And again, I guess our sports betting podcast, as much as we are sports law podcast, those futures, I was watching yesterday, the Falcons moved from 72-1 to 40-1 because of one Adam Schefter tweet that said that the Falcons were a dark horse to land him. And that alone was enough to move the odds all the way up there. So you got to be paying attention to Twitter. Dan, those looks like the leader in the clubhouse. Could a Seahawks emerge? Could a Colts emerge? Sure. But those are our 4 leaders for better. I'm
going to take Dan. I've been down this road so many times with the New York Giants. The Philadelphia Eagles always swoop in. They are the ultimate stealth team here. Last year, they jumped ahead of the Giants in the NFL draft to just steal that Alabama wide receiver out from under them. They need a franchise quarterback, and their ownership and their management have always been very aggressive and proactive about going after the players that they want to get. I think the Eagles could be a very strong landing spot for Deshaun Watson. I'm going to pick the Eagles, even though they're not one of the 4 teams you identified, just because I'm paranoid about the Philadelphia Eagles, and this would be such an Eagles move to do.
Well, Dan, I'm certainly not going to go off the board. I'm going to take one of those 4. I did a couple interviews in Cleveland. I'm just sensing that there would be an uproar at whatever team trades for him. Cleveland fans are one of the more vocal fan bases. I'm not rooting for it. I'm happy none of my teams, the Giants and the Bills, are in the conversation. But we'll see. Dan, the other part that we should hit from the legal side, Watson, and maybe you can speak to this. Watson testified at a deposition kind of underneath the radar earlier this week, did not plead if that is civil cases.
Right.
So we've been on record as saying that, at least I have been, that there have really been no new facts that have come out in this case since October when Roger Goodell said we don't have enough to even put him on the exempt list. So what happened since then? Depositions kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And then he pled the 5th, and then the grand jury basically didn't come back. They returned it in no bill. So now Watson, for the first time, is now testifying. I don't think we know in sum and substance what he testified to, but I've always kind of said once he gives his deposition testimony, that's when Goodell might have that more information. So Dan, what are you hearing about the impact of the deposition?
Well, I mean, what I'm sensing though is that Tony Busby is probably going to be leaking this deposition testimony to the media within 24 hours. The court reporter is probably working on an expedited basis, being paid a premium to turn around the transcript.
Give us a rough transcript.
Yeah, give us a rough transcript, mini script, the full, 1 page. He's gonna get everything, and this is gonna end up in Pro Football Talk, guaranteed before the end of the week.
Sometimes you give guarantees, and I'm like, you know what, Dan, I trust you. But Busby has leaked everything in this case, really, and maybe effectively. But Busby Busby was really grasping at straws after Friday. We didn't talk about it in the podcast, but he was going so far as to say, this is like the O.J. Simpson case. You might not be at a criminal case, but the civil case is still intact. The problem is, the bar for the grand jury is lower than a civil case, right? It's probable cause. It's not preponderance of the evidence. So Busby is playing with the public a little bit. If this case was decided on the evidence, which we're still not sure, it might have been the prosecutor just mailing it in. But if this was decided on the evidence and there was no indictment based on the evidence, you're going to have a hard time proving a civil case beyond a preponderance, like a 51% deal, no?
And then in the NFL world, the standard is almost similar to the grand jury. It's sufficient, credible evidence.
Right.
If grand jury is not going to indict based upon probable cause, I think sufficient, credible evidence probably lies somewhere a little bit lower on the continuum than probable cause. So the non-charge in the criminal case, if you were to look at it as a sliding scale, would likely, if we're talking about the same fact finders, would preclude any discipline in the NFL system. But of course, Roger Goodell is not bound by what a grand jury in Houston, Texas does. But I think Tony Busby's case has been, or his advantage has been severely neutralized by some of the events in the last week, as well as by some of the recent reporting by The Athletic that Roger Goodell will not be placing Deshaun Watson on the commissioner's exempt list. So the only hole card left to play for Tony Busby is the prospect that even though Watson was, rendered inactive for 17 weeks in a row, that now in the aftermath of a non-prosecution, that Roger Goodell will still suspend him for some period of time. But with the exempt list off the table and criminal charges off the table, I don't think Tony Busby's holding a very strong hand. So he's going to be very desperate, and I think that will tip the scales in favor of these transcripts being released if there's anything potentially harmful to that Deshaun Watson said during the deposition.
Okay, Dan, let's obviously watch it. If there is a trade on the Watson front, we will certainly monitor it. Let's do this, Dan. March Madness, let's give a quick plug. As a reminder, this podcast is sponsored by Themis Bar Review. Those guys are changing the game when it comes to bar prep. And obviously we're changing the game when it comes to sports law. So that's why Themis Bar found us. If you are looking for a bar prep company, Themis is the way to go. I'm not sure if they're doing anything for March Madness, Dan, but certainly we are. Depending what time you're listening to this, we are running a March Madness bracket. Let's just say the winner will be featured on the website, maybe make a cameo in this podcast or opening arguments, and then maybe a trophy deal. So Dan, we have, I think we're pioneering the space slowly but surely. And, I love to see, I think we have over 100 registered for our March Madness bracket as of today. Certainly welcome to have more, but we love when people share the podcast and tell people. Year over year, our listenership is up over 400%, which is insane. But people are into sports law. So, let's move on to our next guest, Dan Wetzel, who we can now call a friend of the show, who's been shadow following our coverage, which is great, I guess. But Dan Wetzel has been covering this college hoops corruption scandal for Yahoo Sports. And he's been one of the people banging the drum. If you watch the Scheme, the HBO documentary, Dan Wetzel was one of a handful of big interview subjects, but he really carried the weight here. It's a case similar to the ones like we have, traditionally covered here. Maybe it's uncomfortable to talk about, but someone has to do it. So, it's a case that speaks about bribery, payments made to college athletes. Maybe it's not so bad in the NIL era that we live in. Paying college athletes should not result in someone going to prison, but that's what we have here. We reached out to Dan, as we mentioned, just a listener, tagged us in a post. And all of a sudden, Wetzel was volunteering to come on in the middle of March Madness and, shining a spotlight on college hoops.
We're 2 for 2 with our Yahoo asks. I mean, that's a very strong, site. You have, Charles Robinson, prior guest of Conduct Detrimental, Dan Wetzel, and of course, Woj, made his big name at Yahoo. So that's a really strong roster of writers and journalists. We're very fortunate to have gotten them for today's podcast.
Okay, without further ado, let us hand it over to Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports. Dan, welcome to Conduct Detrimental. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I am great. Good to be surrounded by all these Dans.
So, it is March Madness season. It's all things college basketball. And we are now in a world of name, image, and likeness where athletes can get paid over the table. Now, for the last 4 or 5 years, there had been this, we'll call this corruption investigation into college basketball. The story of Christian Dawkins, people know very well. And we're starting to see the final chapters of that book written with a guy like Will Wade now being out at LSU. So, Dan, you were one of the main guys on this beat. You were featured very heavily in the Scheme, the HBO documentary into this, which, if you have not seen, you should certainly check it out. But now that chapter on Will Wade is closing, Sean Miller, obviously, out at Arizona, we thought this was a good time to kind of bring you in and recap, what went on with this whole saga. And obviously, it involves two federal trials. It involves the Circuit Court of Appeals, a lot of legal elements to this. But Dan, we'll help you unwind it. But at a really high level, can you give us your overall thoughts on the saga and where we are today?
Well, I think that when in September of 17, when the FBI raided a bunch of houses and arrested 10 men, including a bunch of coaches, a financial planner, Christian Dawkins, who's kind of a aspiring agent. They held this press conference at the Southern District of New York. The FBI came out and said, "Hey, we have your playbook. We're coming after everyone. We're going to expose all of the payments to college basketball players." And they were basically codifying the NCAA rule book. They're saying that if you provided a benefit to a player and made that player ineligible per NCAA rules, then you were violating a federal law because you were defrauding the university that player was playing at. So this was now a federal felony. Well, if you know anything about college basketball recruiting, or you don't even have to know anything about college basketball recruiting, that would be like, oh my goodness, isn't that extremely prevalent what's going on? Yes, it is. So when they started and said, we're going to go after everyone, and this is the Southern District of New York, and this is the FBI, this isn't the NCAA initiative or something, you could very easily say, boy, they could arrest like 50 head coaches. They could put 100 schools on probation without, are these guys everyone's going to roll. This could be crazy. And so that's why the scandal seems so big. At the time, they arrested virtually anonymous figures to the general sports fan. These were some assistant coaches and some background people at shoe companies. And they only were dealing with Adidas. And that was the other thing. You could say, well, they're going to get to Nike soon enough. This should be very easy to unravel. In the end, all 10 convictions, 5 went to prison, 3 are in prison right now. But the case never expanded. They never went after head coaches. They never went after athletic directors. They never went after Nike. They never went after more prominent people. And so at the end of the day, I think a lot of people look back and go, well, what was this even about? Nothing changed. By now, with NIL, almost everything that was getting done would be considered NCAA legal, which in turn then would make it federally legal, because you're not defrauding a school if you set up you could easily set up these payments in a different way.
Right.
And only a couple people lost their jobs. So it was a total dud of a case that started with immense fanfare. And again, for those of us, if you're going to hold them to the standard, which I thought was ridiculous, I didn't think this should be a federal offense at all. But if you're going to do that, this should be huge. Instead, it wasn't. And so it's a very bizarre case in what was promised and what actually played out, and how limited the scope was. And that remains the number one question. I think anybody who is really in on this is like, why did they stop? Why didn't they do what they said? I disagree with what they were doing, but if you're going to do it, do it.
Yeah. The funny, I don't know if it's funny or if it's just a sick kind of, result of this, but this investigation was spawned from someone in the finance world, stealing $2 million from clients. And then, I think as part of a way to get himself out of trouble, started giving up, this basketball side of it. So you have a guy like Christian Dawkins, and Dan, I know you've followed this really for a while, and your tweets are, I kind of have a sense of how you're going to answer this, but, I think it's patently unfair that someone can steal, embezzle, whatever word you want to call it, $2 million and end up with no jail time. A guy, and I'm jumping around here, but you'll see where I'm going. A guy like Will Wade, the head coach of LSU, who's on, he's on a recorded line talking about giving money to players, right? He was, I think the federal government tried to, direct people toward these coaches. So that was, you talk about the guy that was stealing money, right? This money manager. And then you talk about Will Wade, the guy who was the FBI thought was influencing players. Neither of those guys get any jail time. Will Wade keeps his job for 2 years too long. And I think, Dan, the part that made me kind of uncomfortable from a legal side, the NCAA look like they started to investigate Wade just from the notice of allegations that came out. For those that don't know, Will Wade fired from LSU. I think it's four allegations essentially against him that he didn't promote and have a culture that was, I guess, leading towards compliance. That he was indirectly or kind of knowingly allowing money to be given to athletes. But this investigation from the NCAA spawned from the end of 2018 until the beginning of 2020. And the NCAA alleges that, Wade didn't want to give up all of his documents and whatnot. So, okay, so that's 2020. These allegations now come out in March of 2022. So the moral of the story is, right, if you're the money manager, hey, just give up these lower level pawns and you don't have to go to jail. And if you're Will Wade, don't cooperate and you'll keep your job for maybe 4 additional years if you cooperate. So Dan, I'm giving you a lot here, but I think from a level of fairness, due process, and justice, I don't think we ended up with a fair result here, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, my writings, I'm a columnist, so I can cover it with a point of view. And the longer you get into this, the more preposterous it got. The worst character in the entire saga was Marty Blazer, the financial planner you talked about. He was in Pittsburgh. He represented a number of pro athletes who are former college athletes, mainly football players, some basketball. He stole about $2.3 million, something like that, over $2 million. Tried to finance a couple movies. They failed, lost the money. They want their money back. But he stole the money. He stole millions. And he says, hey, look, I'll give you college basketball. And the FBI goes with it. But they didn't end up getting anybody. And so the people who got put away, like Christian Dawkins, Jim Gatto, and Merle Code from Adidas, were giving people money. Okay, they provided money to families of recruits so they'd either go to this school or eventually sign with this agency or wear Adidas shoes or whatever. They were giving money. They didn't steal money. It was authorized money from Adidas. They gave money. So you have you have 3 people, these 3 in prison for giving people money, and a guy gets out for stealing money. And so whatever legal, that the law does not always make common sense, but I think if you just basic common sense says, wait, how is that possible? How do you get nobody's sitting there saying, I want my money back, Christian Dawkins. You stole my money. Nobody ever said that. No player or family goes, Christian Dawkins was bad to me. It was, he helped he paid us money. And where there's all sorts of there's victims on the other side. So and then you get into the Will Wade thing. Yeah, he doesn't cooperate. He lasted 4 seasons after the initial scandal, and 3 after we first reported on Yahoo that the contents of his one of the conversations he's on Wiretap talking about making a quote strong ass offer to players. So he's making $2.5 million a year.
Can I stop you here on this issue of injustice, which I forgot to say, which is one of my favorite parts of this whole story, that LSU, I think, goes to ask Will Wade about that, about these allegations.
The report, yeah.
And he goes, I'm not talking about it. So I was telling you, I've heard you on other shows. It's like if the fry cook burns the fries and the boss goes like, what'd you do to those fries? Like, no comment, not talking about it. You're
not talking to my boss. Right.
You're probably fired from your job. Will Wade was suspended, right, when these allegations first came out, but somehow the guy kept his job, after that. So I don't know what the, maybe there's a different fallout from this case if the NIL era isn't upon us. But I just find it very odd that a guy like Will Wade, who's by no means a very popular guy in the college basketball community, how that guy can keep his job for 4 years. It just, LSU gets a lot of flack on the football side, on the basketball side, which something seems very wrong with college basketball if that guy can keep his job for that long. And then, right, the only thing, the impetus for losing his job was these notices of allegations, which we've known about. I mean, I've known about. I'm not in the NCAA. We've all known about these for at least 2 years since you came out on the documentary.
Well, yeah. So 2019, we report this is the contents of the tape, and we run the transcript of the tape, and so we call for comment, whatever. They LSU goes, no comment, and then they ask Will Wade, and he says, yeah, I'm not going to discuss this, so they suspend him. We assume he's going to get fired, right? I mean, that's just I don't care, but that's what your assumption. They reinstate him. He had enough boosters. And that's who run these universities saying, we don't want Will Wade gone. We want Will Wade, which never made any sense to me because Kansas is in a similar situation, a little less egregious in terms of a transcript, but some of them are pretty damning with Bill Self. But Bill Self is a national championship coach at Kansas. Will Wade has never done anything at LSU except buy players. And, they win 25 games or whatever, but he shouldn't be a beloved guy. But yeah, he was able to imagine telling your boss, hey, we have these allegations that you're involved in some impropriety at whatever business you're in, and just go, sorry, not talking about it. So they said, well, look, this is just a news account. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe Yahoo Sports is wrong. Okay. So they did not feel they could fire him for cause on that. 1 year later, HBO in the scheme runs the you can play it. So you can hear it now. Now you can say, well, maybe HBO what does it take to get this? What does it take? The NCAA is never going to get the tape. So it's always going to be third party reporting, but you can literally hear, and he lasted 2 more years after that. So if you've got boosters behind you, the ADs will get fired. The presidents will crumble. It's all about the boosters at these schools. There's no, and so Will Wade made a bunch of money by literally saying, I'm not discussing it.
Yeah. Okay. Dan, this is for you, Dan, our guest. I was hot on the Zion Williamson litigation against his former marketing agent. There were at numerous junctures attempts by Gina Ford's attorneys to connect Zion Williamson to this overarching college basketball, bribery scandal. What, if anything, did you learn about the connection or absence thereof? Because that name came up quite a bit, or the attempt to just link Zion to the Southern District of New York case. What did you learn, if anything, about that?
I'd have to review all of that, but I think this goes to the basic premise of what we're talking about here with LSU is a kid named Marcus Smart. At Louisville is a guy named Brian Bowen. Basketball fans, you got to be one heck of a basketball fan to know who either of those two guys are. Everybody knows Zion Williamson. And this is why this case was so big, could have been so big, because you go, wait, if they're doing this for these guys who are just guys, they're not probably going to be pro players, or if they are fringe NBA players. Well, you don't need to know much about basketball to see Zion Williamson play his senior year of high school and go, that's an NBA player. That guy is going to make a ton of money. He's going to be a top pick. Nike's going to spend a ton of money on him. And so all the colleges are after Zion Williamson. What happens when we get to the elite level and you got a guy like that can literally win you championships, sell out your arena? And, Duke lost in the Elite Eight, but Barack Obama went to one of his games. This was one of the biggest things ever. So what are the deals on that? The Zion case was, a lot came out, but his parents, they have a house in Durham. Is he getting money from this one, getting money from that? And it really just exposes what my thing is, to go back to the why this shouldn't be a crime. It's such an open secret of what's going on. A kid like Zion Williamson is worth so much more money. His market value is worth so much more than tuition, room, and board, which is a nice amount of money at Duke, but it isn't what he's worth. And so these NCAA rules try to stop the wheels of capitalism, and they can't. So there's an underground market, and everybody knows about the market.
Yeah, but then
Krzyzewski knows about the market. Yeah. And so everybody knows what's going on. Nobody cares. You're not defrauding a university if you give him money. The school knows. If by anybody who's I think this guy might be ineligible, you would think that about every single top player. And so, Zion had like 1.8 million Instagram followers in high school. If we know anything about, like, just alone, he could be selling tweets of whatever he wore for whatever that dollar figure is a lot. So these kids had so much value, but we still had that cap on it. And so that's why you have, an agent's going to say, I want to sign you. I will pay you. I remember this story a long time ago. Remember when I was writing a lot about LeBron James, the high school senior. And I remember an agent saying to me, and it blew my mind at the time because I just didn't quite grasp it. But he said, if I could, I would give LeBron James's mother, I'd walk into her apartment and give her $1 million in cash right now if he would sign with me. And I was like, $1 million? You give him $1 million? And he goes, this guy's going to make $1 billion. And you go, oh, okay. And you get 4% of that, or, whatever you're like, it conceptualized to me like, oh, this is worth a way more than just, hey, let's lease him the car, or like in the Hummer deal. Remember he had a Hummer? Do you remember that, LeBron? He had this very scandalous.
I remember the mom allegedly took out the money.
All that I think happened, and I don't want to disparage Akron of Hummer, Akron Hummer dealer or whatever, but the guy was basically like, have the car and pay me in May. It was like January, right? He's like, no payments till May. If I get the coolest guy in town to drive my car, there's value. And you pay me later. And so they had to pretend that she was making payments on, I don't know what happened, but LeBron really blew the lid off of that stuff. And you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, they got more publicity out of that Hummer than Hummer could have gotten buying a Super Bowl ad.
Right.
And they didn't even do anything except let some guy, somehow he was driving around a car.
I want to move on from there for a little bit, because the case that really got my attention, the Christian Dawkins guilty plea. I'm one of those lawyers that stands at the crossroads of sports law and gambling law. And the recent motion for new trial filed by Christian Dawkins really taps into both those areas of expertise.
Yes.
Can you tell us, can you tell our audience just real briefly? I mean, the letter from Dawkins's defense counsel is should one of the best letters I've ever read from a trial lawyer to a judge. But can you tell us what's going on in the Christian Dawkins request for a new trial and how that could potentially impact any of the other cases?
Yeah, Steve Haney is his attorney out of Michigan. He's a very, very good attorney. He did a great job on the Christian case. Christian is in prison right now. But like on their last trial, he won 3 of 4 counts against the Southern District of New York. Everyone goes, "Oh, he got a guilty," but it's like, man, you won 3 of 4 against those guys. Not bad, right? Not bad.
But Dan, the thing that jumped out, I don't mean to interrupt you. If I'm being indicted in the Southern District of New York, a federal district court in New York State, I am not hiring a Michigan lawyer who represents basketball players in other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
That seemed to me to be a very strange.
Well, he was a lot better than the New York attorney that Jim Gatto and Adidas had. I can tell you that. Steve Haney was a tremendous attorney in this. So I don't know that there's a big law firm in New York that was getting someone out. Haney, I think, had the best understanding of how this all worked. And really, this was about the federal government painting a picture of how the world of college basketball recruiting works that is completely detached and inaccurate from how it really does. They were pretending like schools are being defrauded when the coaching staffs of these schools were begging to be defrauded. And the presidents and everyone else is just kind of, everyone's looking, they bring in these compliance directors to say, well, the rule says this. Nobody's listening to the rule. You just talked about Will Wade. He basically overruled his own president. Some assistant compliance director does not have any control over a major coach. So when you get to the to your point, though, to the Dawkins thing, what happened was the key element of this case. There were 5 FBI agents that worked on the case. 4 of them have been accused of some form of wrongdoing by the FBI, like internally. And that includes this guy, Carpenter, who's a special agent who just pled guilty to misappropriation of funds. And the misappropriation of funds was they set up. So Christian Dawkins kept saying he's a young guy. He's trying to get this sports agency going. He needs investors, right? He doesn't have cash. He's got connections. He has guile. He's a smart guy, all that, but he doesn't have any money, and he needs money to pay people around players so that they'll eventually sign with pay the players or pay their families, and then they'll sign with his whatever marketing agency or sports agency he goes with. So he needs money. So with Marty Blazer running this, doing this whole thing, he gets introduced to these moneyed investors on this big New York yacht, and it's the FBI. They're undercover agents. So one of the things that they kept trying to do is they wanted to bribe college coaches, and they kept saying, we want to pay an assistant basketball coach, $10,000 to say, hey, steer your top player to our agency. And Christian and Merle Code too, who got convicted in this case, in these counts as well, even though he's barely on any of the calls. They're literal conversations in the wiretap that were played in federal court where they're going, this is stupid. What are these guys doing? And Christian would say to the investors, the FBI guys, but he didn't know they were FBI guys, look, that's not how you get a player. An assistant coach at the school does not have control over that. The person who will make that decision is his dad, his mom, the kid himself. You have to pay those people, not these people. And the FBI kept saying, no, pay these people. They pay these people. He goes, this is a waste of money. We can give an assistant coach at Arizona $10,000, but he can't deliver what you're asking. You're throwing money out the window. They said, do it. So he finally says, what he says to Code at one point, if these suckers want to burn money, whatever. So they set up this whole meeting in Vegas. They have this undercover meeting. There's a big recruiting tournament out there. And all the assistant coaches are there recruiting. And Christian brings all these guys through this big suite at I think Cosmopolitan in Vegas. And the guys come through and they get money. And a lot of them give the money back. And Christian actually takes the money to, he kind of reroutes it. He's basically saying, come by. Some of these guys didn't even have any good players. He's making up names of players so that to just get the investors off his back.
He just wants the money, right? At the end,
he just wants the money.
Right.
He wants to take the money and do it the right way by his standard, which is if I pay, let's just make it LeBron James. Let's just use the name like LeBron James. If I pay LeBron James and his mother, whatever. Like if I pay LeBron James and his mother, or let's make like Carmelo Anthony, okay? So he's not involved at all, but he went to college. If I pay Carmelo Anthony or Carmelo Anthony's family, we might get to sign him. If I pay Jim Boeheim, Carmelo Anthony's not listening to Jim Boeheim. Like Jim Boeheim, if Jim Boeheim or some assistant coach at Syracuse, they go, Carmelo will be like, I don't care what you think. I'm getting money from over here.
Right.
So that's the difference. So he just wants the money. He wants to take the money and actually, he's like, this isn't going to help me get a client. So what we find out is, they bring however many amounts of money to this event. After the meeting, Carpenter, and nobody knows this, Carpenter, he just pleads. We discover it in a conviction notice out of the Southern District of Nevada, or federal court, Nevada. He takes the money and immediately goes, and I'm forgetting how much, what was it? 30?
It was $13,000.
13 grand, yeah. And goes to a high roller room and gambles
with government money. With
government money. Takes the pile of money that they have, some of the money, takes the money, immediately goes gambles. Now, again, we had heard throughout the trial, he's never testified. They never named any of these guys. Who are these investors? They knew him as these different names, but they never were able to cross-examine them. They never find anything out about them. And 4 of the 5 had done something. So this guy takes the money and immediately gambles it away. Now, to me, and you guys are the lawyers, but when someone's pushing you to set up a meeting where there's a bunch of money, and then that makes no sense, and they're told it makes no sense, and then they take the money and gamble, their motivation for that meeting is probably not because they actually thought, you could at least make this argument. At least I would be interested in this argument that they actually thought this was good police work or whatever, investigative work. They just wanted the money. And to me, nobody takes $13,500 and goes to a high limit room. Like, that's not skimming $100 and getting a steak. That's not, let's play some blackjack down at the tables. I stole $300. That guy's probably in debt and he's trying to gamble his way out. He's probably has other huge problems in his life. Who just takes 13 grand and goes into a high roller room?
When you're an FBI agent,
Making
right?
80 grand, 80, 90 grand. Yeah.
Using the proceeds or the money that was being used to quote
As
unquote
the setup. Yeah.
lay the trap. So the government says that, well, we have Christian Dawkins on tape. All this stuff about what happened afterwards is completely irrelevant, yet 4 out of the 5 FBI agents seem to have been involved in some quote unquote improper conduct. Who knows what the other 3 agents were involved in? And Haney, refers to it as if it's this huge statistical, thing. 80% of the case agents assigned to the case, 4 out of 5. But it really, in my mind, goes to the quality of the investigation, the motivation of the agents. I think that might be something that the jury would like to know about. It certainly goes to the credibility of what the FBI was trying to do here. And if the jury had been given and been supplied this information, there might have been a different result. So where do we go from
the trial judge, Judge Ramos? You're appealing to the guy who ran the trial, which is always to me just doesn't. It just doesn't make systematic sense. But he has said, I want the government's response. So that alone, because, I thought, well, okay, you can file it. And this was a week. They got a 1 week delay on Dawkins going to prison, but now he's in prison. So,
okay, well, appealing, it's not exactly an appeal to the
it's not appeal,
judge who made the decision, because they're going to get that chance once Judge Ramos renders his ruling on the motion for a new trial. That order in and of itself is appealable. This is not exactly like a Roger Goodell, prosecutor, jury, and executioner scenario, but a trial judge in federal court is given considerable discretion on matters of evidence. But now we're talking about a new trial, which is, I think, less deferential to the judge's decision. So what's the latest on Dawkins's motion for a new trial? Is that going to be decided anytime soon? And
so the government had until, I believe, the 22nd of March to respond. And then however long. So he did order a response. He didn't just summarily dismiss the motion.
Well, they responded yesterday.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yeah. And they
I'm on top of it.
That was a trick question. That was a trick question.
Oh, what are you setting me up, man? You are a lawyer.
Dan, I'd be happy to send you the pleading. You don't even have to credit me in the article, but the government continues its narrative that it was completely unconnected to Dawkins's behavior, which was recorded, and they continue to stick to their story. But now it's going to be in the court's hands and ultimately a ruling very soon. So
I doubt there's a new trial. I mean,
why do you say that?
Because I sat through that case. The Southern District of New York is going to side with the prosecutors. That does not. I've been in courtrooms around the country, and I don't know one that's less. I just don't expect it. I assume they're going with the prosecution.
I was at 500 Pearl Street a week ago for a case of mine. They're finally back to being live. But I think now we got so many Dans here, but to Dan Wetzel's point, right? You're making the application to the same judge that oversaw the case. So I think, I think to some extent the fix is in. So if you're a sports betting guy, right, I think you'd put it at minus 200 or more, that he's not going to. But to Dan Wetzel's point, right, like, we probably should be investigating what a potential degenerate gambler is doing with $13,500. And if those are the guys that are tasked with the investigation, I think it's, Dan, you said 80%. I think it's 4 of the 5, FBI agents involved had some type of wrongdoing, or we don't know what it is. We don't know if there's other money. So if the people running the investigation are running around with the money and gambling it, right? And those are the same people. And Dan, I want to bring this up before I give it back to you, Wallach. The concept, and Dan Wetzel, you're certainly closer with this case than we were, but the concept of entrapment keeps coming to my mind as I read your writings on this case. it didn't appear to me that Christian Dawkins wanted to pay these college coaches. It never did. That was an idea that I think was given to him by these FBI, these plugs, right? So if they're the ones giving him the idea, he doesn't really want to do it. He's making up the names of these Creighton prospects, his college coaches, these assistants that are coming into this hotel room are then giving the money back to Christian Dawkins. They're like, hey, I didn't really need this money. Why'd you give it to me? Here's the money back. Like, doesn't this speak to the fact that, we talk about as lawyers, something called mens rea. That's like someone's culpable mindset. And I don't think Dawkins ever intended to commit this crime, but for the government jamming this money down his throat and forcing him to give it to other people.
And he's on wiretap stating that.
Right.
He's literally on the tape saying, this is stupid. What are you doing? Let's not do this. And then talking on the side going, these guys are idiots. It doesn't make any sense.
That's the part that I think needs to be investigated. And
so my thing, and it's, did this guy Carpenter want the meeting because he knew if we get a meeting in Vegas, I get to bring a couple $100,000 of government money and I can peel off 13,000, hit a high roller room, maybe triple my money and do something with it. Again, is this guy in debt?
He's like, let's round up the boys.
This is desperate behavior.
Right.
This is not big party night in Vegas.
Like, let's bring up Daniel Negreanu, Phil Ivey. Let's get the boys.
Right.
The Hold'em game going. I'm here. They got the money.
That would make more sense than this, though. And like, how desperate are you as an FBI agent to commit a crime with government money where you're walking into a high roller room in Vegas where the cameras? I mean, it's the worst place to go do it.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Dan, I think, Dan Wetzel, I agree. The judge is probably, the more I think about this, the judge is probably going to deny the motion for new trial because the allegations themselves were disclosed to the defense, during the course of the, criminal proceeding. And all that's changed is it went from an allegation.
But it was an unknown allegation.
An unknown allegation, but some additional details are now known that weren't previously known. But
they're saying we should have been able to have at least a disclosure, or I forget the term, but without the jury there, we should have been able to question this guy.
Yeah. So Haney writes about this, as far as the Carpenter's, isolated incident, how it fits into his broader behavior and maybe some of the surrounding problems he has in his life. Haney wrote that, and this is like very flowery prose from the letter. Certainly, one would be naive to believe that such lack of professional conduct was limited to ingesting a hot dog and a Coke or playing a penny slot with taxpayer dollars. One can only fathom the psychology of an FBI agent taking government money during the middle of an undercover FBI investigation occurring inside a Las Vegas casino, walking into the casino's high-limit room replete with surveillance video and gambling $13,500 of taxpayer money, asking anyone, including this honorable court, to presume such degeneracy would be limited to one reckless act of brazen thievery is borderline preposterous.
That was like you really think.
That was great lawyering, by the way.
That's an act of a desperate human being, in my opinion. And so I would, as an observer of this case, I would want to know more about this character.
Wait, Dan, before I turn it to Lust, if a new trial is granted, does this potentially open up a Pandora's box for any of the other defendants who've been convicted or pled guilty? Is this isolated to the Christian Dawkins scenario, or were we talking about monies that were used in the investigation for some of the other defendants who were accused in different cases?
This would pertain almost exclusively, I think, this incident to some of the convictions of Christian Dawkins and Merle Code. There were two trials. One was a fraud trial, and the fraud plea bargains, which was you're defrauding a university by paying a player. This was a separate bribery case where you're bribing assistant coaches. And so the only two that stood trial on that were Dawkins and Code. And so they could. But here's the thing. Code is a month into his sentence. He's going to do 9 months. Dawkins is a week in. The other, we had there's two Actually, this could involve the 2 bribery cases. Actually, maybe not. Trying to think, because they all got charged with, so this is what the government does. Of course, it's like, you're facing 600 years in prison because you got, some of these guys are facing 200 years in prison if you, when they put out that stuff. But there were two assistant coaches, Lamont Evans, who was at Oklahoma State and South Carolina, and Book Richardson at Arizona. They both already served. They took money. They both served 3 months. So, I mean, you could get at best felonies stripped, which I'm sure they would appreciate. But I mean, the guys are in prison. Like I said, Christian Dawkins and Merle Code are waking up in prison this morning. So even if you eventually got a new trial on that and got, the damage is kind of done.
So, Dan, I wanted to take you to this part, and then this will kind of lead us to the larger NIL conversation. Brian Bowen Sr. is the father of one of the recruits that you mentioned. And as you, just so everyone's aware, and Dan, I commend you. We were talking offline. This is like a landmine of facts. You got 2 federal cases at the NCAA. There's a lot here, but just the high level takeaways. Dawkins was not at any point talking to the number 1 recruits in the country or the number 5 recruit. Bowen, I think, was, a top 50 recruit, top 30 recruit. He was right around there. So Brian Bowen Sr. Testified under oath at certain portions of this case. And I'm just going to quote from one of these articles. He testified to an $150,000 package offered by Oklahoma State, an $100,000 package offered by Creighton, a $50,000 package package offered by Arizona. So, again, someone's testifying under oath, unless they're, if they're lying, they're committing perjury, but you have to kind of take someone at face value when they testify under oath. So, that's between $50,000 and $150,000. I would think, when we first heard about this in 2020, 2019, those were big numbers. Now I'll take you now to 2022. We're hearing about these, NIL collectives where sometimes 8 figures, $8 million is being discussed, or low 7 figures for a guy like Bryce Young over at Alabama. I don't know if you know this, Dan, but where do you think, financially, do you think more money is being spent on athletes now than there was back then because we're doing it above the table? I'm not sure how to compare these 2 eras.
That's very interesting. Maybe. First off, there was undoubtedly there would be a booster who, if you said, "Hey, do you want to get involved in this and kick in $5,000, we're raising money for Brian Bowen," who again was just a good player. Somebody's going, "I'm not doing, I don't want to cheat. I don't need this," right? This is against the rules. There's undoubtedly plenty of people who are like, "I'm not messing with that. That's just not my thing." Now that you make it legal, and it's no different than writing a check to the athletic department. Yeah, I think there probably is. And we're going to find out their market value. Is a recruit worth $8 million? Probably not. That story's got kind of like a 2023 star quarterback. Certainly possible. But if you take the top 12 quarterbacks from 4 years ago or 5 years ago in high school, basically the Trevor Lawrence class, only 3 of them even finished at their school. So, and you talk about, some of these guys you're going to pay out a ton of money and that kid's going to transfer. And some point boosters are going to go, what am I wasting my money on here? I'm not getting any return. I think the market will fluctuate, but is a kid like Brian Bowen, who again would have been a good piece. And what was going on there is Brian Bowen Jr., Brian Bowen Sr., both from Saginaw, Michigan, which is where Christian Dawkins is from, and where his dad was a legendary high school coach. So again, Dawkins is trying to get this business going. He's using connections. He can't get in with Zion Williamson. He's nobody, right? He's Christian Dawkins, but he can get in with this guy, the best guy out of Saginaw. I can get in on him. And what happened there, and this is what you see, this is part of the overall case and why, and to answer your NIL question a little bit, Adidas was going to pay that money. Dawkins didn't have the money. Whatever they paid, it was going to be about $100,000 to Brian Bowen to send him to Louisville and pay his dad's apartment in Louisville and things like that. Louisville was a huge Adidas school. They have a huge $100 million deal with Adidas. Rick Pitino's the coach. Adidas is sitting there saying, okay, because this is what the NCAA always wants to paint is Adidas gives Louisville $100 million to sponsor their teams. Isn't that great? And they want to act like Adidas works for Louisville. But when someone gives you $100 million, you work for them. They don't work for you. And Adidas is not going to sit there and say, here's $100 million. Boy, we hope Coach Pitino coaches the boys up and we make the Final Four and we sell the T-shirts and we get – they're going to say, we're going to help – we're going to protect our investment. We're going to activate our investment. We're going to back our investment. And we're going to help you by saying, look, you got a really good team, but you know what you can really use? One more player. So we're going to send you Brian Bowen. Because we got $100 million into Louisville basketball. What's another $100,000 or $65,000 or $50,000, whatever, to get you a starting player who might be the guy that gets you over the Sweet 16 to a Final Four. And then my bosses are happy. Everyone's happy. Louisville wins. And that's what was going on. And everyone at Louisville, other than a few people, knew it. Anybody who thought that this business was somehow, oh, Louisville's Adidas just giving us money, it's just great. Everybody knew how it worked. But they pretended that they didn't. And that's why this case was it's just such fraud, because it's like, come on, here's the reality of the situation. So we get, is Bowen worth $100,000? Yeah. I mean, you're worth whatever the market's going to give you. But if you can see it on the basis of how much Adidas is looking at this investment and saying, yeah, we'll spend $100 million to back our other investment. Are they making more? I think they're going to make more for a little while. Then I think the boosters will start kicking back and going, why in the world did I just throw money away on a guy who transfers? Why? How is this collective going to work? I don't know. I think it's going to go up and down. But these kids are worth a lot of money, clearly.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and then we'll get you out with this. I think, I was reading some of the the NCAA's report on Will Wade, and it looks like a lot of the names are blacked out, which, I highly recommend everyone reading it. Dan, I know you tweeted part of the excerpts as well. But that somebody, it seems like a family member associated with one of these recruits is saying, hey, can you send me another 5? Can you send me another 9? I need a down payment on a car. And at a certain point, Will Wade, allegedly sends a text like, hey, in my mind, I thought we were done. So, that's going to be it. I think in the world that we are in now, if $5,000 is going to seal the deal, and that 5,000 is done above the table, I think that 5,000 gets paid, right? It's a different, like, maybe I don't want to spend 5,000 to get an athlete, but if I can do it above board, right, with the Gator Collective or the Texas Pancake Club, and do it above board, right, and give someone $100,000, I think you're more inclined to do it. So I'm with you. I think we'll see what the next 5 years bear out, but I think today athletes are making more above the table than they did underneath the table, and I think that's probably the fear of this stuff coming up. And now that you can do it, in broad daylight, there's no caps until the NCAA pops in. You can still have a guy like Charlie Batch over at Eastern Michigan offering up, hey, Caleb Williams, come here, we'll pay you $1 million.
Right.
If that stuff is not being punished, I don't think there's a ceiling on this world at all.
Well, you also have the parents who now would say, hey, we're in on this. Like, there were players who did not take money because they were scared of the rules. And you're saying, look, I'm one and done here. We have some money. We're not broke. We have some money. We don't need your money. I'm not risking getting caught up in this whole thing because, so not every parent is going to deal with who are you? I'm an agent that, I'll pay your car payment. I got my car payment. Don't worry about it. Not every player in college athletics is like dirt poor or come from dysfunction. A lot of them don't. So there are more parents now that are sitting there saying, I mean, these guys will design their logo. You're a 60. If you're a top 100 football player in the class of 2025, probably. If you're top 10 and 20, you could be a great 8th grader right now. Yeah, you're going to have agents coming to you, and you might sit there and say, hey, I'm going to sign with CAA, right? Why wouldn't I? It's no different than if your kid's about to win American Idol at 15, or, you've got a chance to be the next Taylor Swift. You're not sitting there going, I don't need an agent. I'll just trust the music industry. This will work out. That's what we were telling people to do before. Now you're going to get William Moore. Everyone's going to be in there saying, hey, we'll do this for you. This is what we can do. And so every parent is going to sit there and say, well, why wouldn't I? Now, maybe some are going to say, I don't want to sell out my kid, or we don't need that pressure, but there's going to be way more open eyes. So there will be more money flowing from besides the under the table to this. But one of the things everyone's complaining about, well, they're paying the players now. Like, again, they were always paying the players. And I think it's healthier for the players, the school, everyone, if it's being done through a professional sports agent above the board with the collective, with the contract, than Brian Bowen, senior, and Christian Dawkins and payments. And they're meeting at the Louisville assistant at a gas station. And here's money. Like, this is not a good, this is, Brian Bowen senior's crying on the stand because he screwed his kid's career up. The kid never played in college. Maybe he plays for Rick Pitino for a couple years and makes the NBA. He never gets that training. There's all sorts of tumult. And you go, God, this is like, who wins out of this? This was terrible. Should he have not done it? Yeah, he probably shouldn't have. But at the same time, what did he want? He wanted an apartment in Louisville so he could watch his son, be near his son. He was a former police officer in Saginaw on disability. And should he have done it? No. But would it be much better if this is just above the table?
Yeah, I think as we're getting you out, I think I'm seeing it should be trending more, but the free Christian Dawkins hashtag, I saw it in light of, Will Wade getting fired from his school. Big deal, right? There's a man that's serving prison time for, God forbid, right, giving money to athletes, and we're in the middle of the NIL era where that's all the rage. So we'll keep an eye on it, Dan. But we love the breakdown, and Dan, we'd be remiss if we didn't plug this on the way out. We on our show, we're lawyers, but we're also talking sports. We have probably 50-50 sports fans and lawyers. Dan, you are the author of a series of children's books, which I have now up on my screen now. Epic Athletes. You've done profiles of Steph Curry, Alex Morgan, Serena Williams, Brady, LeBron, Messi, Simone Biles, Durant, Mahomes, Zion. Can you just, it looks like a fascinating series. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah. So, when my kids were coming through middle school, they're basically from, could be as little as, as young as third grade, but third to eighth grade, depends on your reading level. I noticed that there were not, I used to read these kind of books, these 100-page athlete bios. I can still repeat facts I remember from reading, the Larry Bird one and different ones that stick with you the rest of your life. And they really weren't out there. So I started doing them. They're basically designed for middle schoolers, far more upbeat stories than what we just discussed.
Usually the lawyers, we bring you down, but we'll build you back.
I know. I cover, it'd be funny. I'd be writing those books. Nothing's funny about this, but I'd be covering Larry Nassar or Aaron Hernandez cases, and then writing happy prose about Steph Curry being so cool at a shooter, and what kind of dog, does he have pets? Stuff like that. But it's very designed for the middle schooler, and it's written with a focus on when they were in middle school. So I would talk to former teammates of theirs and coaches in middle school. And a lot of them have these interesting stories. Like Steph Curry was like, you're too small. You're not as good as your dad. Or Alex Morgan was famously cut from a travel team once. And
Michael Jordan Jr. situation.
Yes. Right. One of the worst, I have no idea how, but she did. And then 2 years later, she's on the U17 national team. But Serena Williams was the younger sister, right? You're the other sister. You're not as good as your older sister. So they're basically just the sports bios of those, but kids have liked them. So I appreciate you bringing them up.
Yeah. Dan, listen, our absolute pleasure. We've had on, we've had big journalists on the show. Dan, you are one of our biggest guests that we've had. So we certainly appreciate the time that you're spending with us. And honestly, there's not enough coverage of this particular story. And we're here as in this intersection of sports and law to really bring attention. Maybe they're messy stories, but someone's got to cover them. So
well, I love this podcast and I love this intersection. So appreciate you having me on. I'll come on anytime.
Oh, thank you very much, Dan. We'll definitely take you up on that. We only covered a small percentage of what you've been writing about over the last month. You do almost like a story a day. So I've just looked in the last 30 days, you've written about 25 stories. How do you do that?
I don't know. You should send that to my boss. Would you could send a note?
Send him this podcast.
A lot of topics out there, a lot going on.
Raise.
Dan, an absolute pleasure. And thanks again for joining us.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you, Dan. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
So that was Dan Wetzel. You can find him on social media at Dan Wetzel, Wetzel. I thought Dan was excellent. It's a story that I think people have largely forgotten about because, as they say in the law, right? You say with clients, you kind of want to under promise and over deliver. What the FBI did here was they overpromised and then woefully under-delivered. So people kind of left with a sour taste in their mouth. And if you're listening to our commentary, I think for good reason, but it's still an important case and still one that I think, people were wondering how it concluded. And this is really the conclusion with Will Wade leaving, Christian Dawkins kind of last ditch effort to avoid a prison sentence. But, that's really it. Dan, let us wrap up this episode with a what to watch for. Busy week of sports law. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, two cases jump out in particular that just hit the newswire last night in a California federal district court. The magistrate judge who's, I guess, issuing rulings in the minor league baseball, wage suit. I think it's the Senne case. Made just a path-breaking ruling that the minor league baseball players from California, Arizona, and Florida were not just seasonal employees or non-employees, but they were actual employees of Major League Baseball and awarded damages to the California class. And there's going to be a trial on damages as to some of the remaining plaintiff classes of Arizona and Florida's, minor league baseball players. So this is, I think, the first, maybe one of the first of its kind rulings that minor league baseball players are officially or recognized under the law as employees of Major League Baseball. And the pendulum may start to swing significantly in favor of the minor league baseball players getting a fair wage and getting compensation and back pay for the years in which they were not recognized as employees, but should have been treated as employees. So this is a significant ruling. There are going to be trials coming up over the next couple of months to compute and determine the amount of damages that these plaintiffs can recover. And, I don't know what the bottom line figure is going to be, but it's going to be significant exposure for Major League Baseball. And then the second case is a friend of the show, Jim Quinn, who's representing the city of Oakland in its relocation battle against the National Football League regarding the transfer of the Raiders from Oakland to Las Vegas. He's lost a couple of the federal cases involving the federal antitrust claims. A federal district court and then subsequently the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals rejected the federal antitrust claims brought by the city of Oakland yesterday or 2 days ago, depending on when this podcast was released. Mr. Quinn joined up with Supreme Court litigator Tom Goldstein to file a petition for writ of certiorari with the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of the city of Oakland. And they're going to be looking to have the federal antitrust claims reinstated by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the battle has just begun, Dan. The cert petition was filed just a couple of days ago, but at some point before the end of June, we may get a decision or at least an inkling from the U.S. Supreme Court as to whether cert is going to be granted. So the relocation battle involving the Oakland Raiders may not be over just yet. There are still potentially a couple more chapters, left in this story.
Dan, those are both good ones to follow. We try to give you guys stuff to look out for us, just in case Dan and I can't convene for an emergency podcast. You guys know where to look for the news. My what to watch for, people, have showed up, Dan. Dan, you don't know what I'm about to tell you, but we've had almost 10,000 people vote on this Law of Madness bracket for a week, right? People have been voting and living through the nostalgia of their law school cases. The finals ended up being the number one seed, Brown versus Board of Education, versus the number one seed, Palsgraf versus Long Island Railroad. So two kind of heavy hitters in our law school world. Dan, I'm here to announce for the first time the winner of the inaugural Conduct Detrimental / New York Law School case tournament. That is Palsgraf versus Long Island Railroad. Dan, you're given a faith.
Brown versus Board of Education?
The question was most memorable law school case. It was a very tough vote. I think it was like 53% to 47%. But Dan, at the end of the day, I can recite the facts of Brown versus Board, but I know everyone can recite the facts to Palsgraf versus Long Island Railroad, a case where someone is trying to get on a train at the Long Island Railroad and a train employee pushes the guy to help him get on and unbeknownst to everybody, this guy has in his bag loaded fireworks. The bag falls, the fireworks go off, they hit this contraption up top, it falls on someone. It's such a wild fact pattern, Dan. Next year when we run it back, we're not going to do most memorable. Maybe we'll do like most foundational or most important case, but most memorable. I always knew Palsgraf was going to win this. It is the most memorable fact pattern, at least. I think that's hard to argue.
Yeah, memorable takes on many forms, and for me, and Justice Thurgood Marshall, and for so many, so many people. I mean, how can anything override Brown versus Board of Education? But I guess that's why there's voting, and I would have voted for Brown. I would have voted for, Murphy
You
versus
voted for-
NCAA. I would have voted for a lot of other cases.
You would have voted
All
for
that-
International Shoe, for Penoyer. I know your favorites.
Oh, yeah. International shoe for sure. I mean, civil procedure is at the foundation of everything that we do at as trial lawyers and litigators, but causation is only one subset of tort law, and it's a foundational piece of the puzzle. But I mean, my God, Brown versus Board of Education. Well, they're going to come back strong next year, and they're going to win. They're going to win because Brown versus Board of Education gets my vote. And I got a question, what people are thinking about when speaking of enduring memorable cases, how a causation case can trump or be deemed more memorable than something that transformed and gave rise to the civil rights era, or the civil rights movement in the United States. But I guess that's why we have these debates.
Yeah, it's a fun one. So Dan, I guess here's the other announcement. In addition to Paul's graph winning, we got so much engagement with this. Again, we don't like to necessarily report the numbers here, but just important. We have lawyers, we have law students, we have sports fans. This Law of Madness case bracket was seen across social media in the vicinity of 500,000 times. So 500,000 people saw this crazy bracket that we put out with the students of New York Law School. So what we decided to do, we are always in the mood of conduct detrimental, of giving back. What we're going to do for first time for conduct detrimental, and we'll put the link out somewhere, we're going to put shirts out of the bracket. Not that the shirts are so important. It's kind of a cool concept. We'll put the finished bracket, but where the money is going, we are going to be creating a sports law competition fund. Dan and I, we're big champions of this. We've talked about the Tulane competitions, the Villanova competitions, the Fordham competitions. There's competitions around the country where students are competing basically in a mock trial situation, arguing sports law. And now that the world is opening back up, I did my first in-person panel at Fordham, last week for the first time in years doing an in-person panel. We'd like our students to be able to, and listeners of our show, to be able to travel to destinations, be it New Orleans, be it New York City, to attend some of these events. So we'll figure out the exact percentages, but we want all the money that goes from these shirts to go to these competition funds. So if you want to support sports law competitions nationwide and students going to these competitions, check out a shirt, and we'll be posting it. So maybe we'll have some type of button where people can just donate and they don't have to actually buy a shirt, but the shirts are pretty cool. I've been working with Stephen Nigro over at New York Law School, president of their sports law society, and also just a graphics design guy on the shirts, on the store. So by the time you guys listen to us, those will be up live. But Dan, it feels nice to give back to the sports law community at large. It does.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful to be part of it. So of course, I would love to give back. I didn't have there was no sports law community that I knew of back when I was a law school student. So to be part of something this big and it's becoming this growing phenomenon, it's really exciting for me as well. And we're happy to be able to offer these opportunities and to be able to engage our audience like this.
100%, Dan, and we're continuing to spread the gospel of sports law. That'll put this week's episode in the books. Dan Wallach is on social media at Wallach Legal, myself at Sports Law Lust, our guest, Dan Wetzel at Dan Wetzel, the show at Con Detrimental. As always, this podcast is sponsored by Themis Bar Review, the top bar prep company in the entire galaxy. For Dan, myself, and the rest of our lovely Conduct Detrimental family, we will see you next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.